Most people surrender their power before the day even begins. They wake up anxious about what others think, desperate to justify their choices, terrified of losing what was never truly theirs. How did we become so enslaved to the opinions of people who barely think about us at all? The modern world has turned us into beggars. We beg for validation through screens. We chase approval like addicts chasing their next fix. We explain ourselves to people who will never understand us, exhausting our energy in a war we can never win. The Stoics watched this same pattern 2,000 years ago, in the marble halls of Rome and the dusty streets of Athens. They saw how desperate need destroys dignity, how explanation weakens authority, how chasing repels what we seek. And they discovered something profound. True power lies in the space where need dies. Marcus Aurelius ruled the greatest empire on earth, yet he wrote in his private journals about the freedom that comes from needing nothing from anyone. Epictetus was born a slave, owned by another human being, yet he became one of the freest minds in history because he understood a simple truth. You cannot control other people, but you can control your need for them. Seneca advised emperors and survived the madness of Nero's court by mastering the art of emotional independence. If they could find sovereignty in chains and chaos, what excuse do we have in our comfortable prisons of self-imposed desperation? There is a law that governs human power, invisible but absolute. It operates in relationships, in business, in every interaction where one person holds themselves with quiet certainty and another reaches out with desperate hands. The law is this: power flows toward those who need nothing, and away from those who need everything. When you chase, you announce your scarcity. When you explain, you reveal your doubt. When you beg, you surrender your throne. The Stoics understood this not as manipulation, but as psychological reality. The universe rewards self-possession and punishes neediness with mathematical precision. Most people spend their entire lives violating this law without knowing it exists. They wake up checking their phones, desperate to see if someone responded, if someone noticed, if someone cares. They craft careful explanations for choices that need no justification. They pursue people who have already shown disinterest, convinced that more effort will somehow create attraction. And they wonder why respect evades them, why relationships feel like constant negotiation, why they always seem to be losing ground in invisible battles. The truth cuts deeper than we want to admit. Every time you chase someone who is walking away, you teach them you are worth leaving. Every time you explain yourself to someone who has already judged you, you validate their right to judge. Every time you beg for what should be freely given, you transform yourself from sovereign to supplicant. And the tragic irony? The more you do these things, the less you receive what you seek. Desperation repels. Neediness suffocates. Explanation weakens the very authority you are trying to establish. We live in an age that has confused authenticity with emotional incontinence. We are told to express every feeling, to chase every desire, to demand that others validate our experience. But the Stoics saw through this lie. They understood that true strength is not found in expressing every impulse, but in mastering the impulses that destroy us. They knew that freedom does not come from getting what you want, but from no longer being controlled by wanting it. They discovered that respect is not demanded or explained into existence. It is commanded through the quiet dignity of someone who needs nothing from you. Consider the untrained mind, the one that reacts to every slight, explains every choice, chases every opportunity. It is like a city without walls, invaded constantly by the opinions and actions of others. There is no center, no sovereignty, no peace. Just endless reactivity, endless need, endless explanation. This mind wakes up already defeated, already on trial, already begging the world to see it differently. And the world, Sensing this weakness, treats it accordingly. But there exists another way. A way practiced by those who understood that the ultimate power is not power over others, but power over the self. A way that transforms you from someone the world happens to, into someone who happens to the world. A way that makes you dangerous, not because you are aggressive, but because you cannot be moved by the forces that move everyone else. Before we go deeper, if you are tired of feeling powerless in your own life, if you are ready to reclaim your sovereignty, subscribe to this channel. This is where we learn to master ourselves, not the world. The Stoic law of power begins with a single recognition. Most of what you chase is running from you because you are chasing it. This is not metaphor, it is psychology. Humans are wired to value what is scarce and dismiss what is abundant. When you chase, you signal abundance. You are available, you are eager, you are waiting. And the human mind, both consciously and unconsciously, devalues what is too available. Your pursuit creates the very distance you are trying to close. Watch this pattern in relationships. The person who calls repeatedly, who explains why they should be chosen, who rearranges their entire life around another's schedule, they are not valued more for this effort. They are valued less, not because people are cruel, but because pursuit signals lower status in the ancient calculus of human psychology. We respect what we have to work for. We dismiss what works for us. This is not fair, but it is true. And the Stoics were not interested in fair. They were interested in truth. The same pattern appears in every domain of life. The employee who constantly explains their value rarely gets promoted. The friend who is always available is rarely prioritized. The person who begs for respect never receives it. Why? Because explanation and pursuit create the very doubt they are trying to resolve. When you feel compelled to explain why you deserve something, you have already communicated that you doubt you deserve it. And that doubt is contagious. There is profound wisdom in silence, in the refusal to justify yourself to those who have already decided not to understand. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and nowhere is this more apparent than in our endless need to make others see us correctly. We create elaborate explanations, craft perfect arguments, rehearse conversations that will never happen, all in service of changing a mind that we do not control and should not need to change. Think about the last time you felt compelled to explain yourself. What were you really doing? You were handing your power to someone else, asking them to validate your choice, seeking permission to be who you already are. And in that moment of explanation, you transformed from author to defendant, from sovereign to subject. The Stoics would ask you, why do you need their approval? What do you lose if they misunderstand you? And can you bear the weight of your own choices without needing others to affirm them? This is where most people fail. They cannot bear the discomfort of being misunderstood. They cannot tolerate the space between their truth and another's perception. So they explain and explain and explain, never realizing that explanation is a form of begging, a plea for someone else to give them the internal certainty they lack. But certainty cannot be given by others. It can only be forged in the fire of self-knowledge, in the quiet conviction that your choices are yours alone to make and yours alone to justify. Marcus Aurelius, who could have commanded explanation from every person in his empire, instead wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." He saw the trap clearly. We claim to value our own judgment, yet we exhaust ourselves trying to shape the judgment of others. We say we know our own worth, yet we beg the world to confirm it. This contradiction is the source of endless suffering. The Stoic path offers liberation from this trap, but the price is high. You must be willing to be misunderstood. You must be comfortable with people drawing wrong conclusions about you. You must develop a core of certainty so strong that external opinion becomes merely weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes harsh, but never definitive. This is not arrogance. Arrogance is the desperate need to prove you are better than others. This is sovereignty, the quiet knowledge that you are not on trial, not performing for approval, not seeking permission to exist as you are. When you stop explaining yourself, something remarkable happens. The people who matter, who are capable of understanding you, will understand without lengthy justification. And the people who do not matter, who are never going to understand, remain unchanged, but no longer drain your energy. You discover that most explanation is wasted effort, thrown at audiences who have neither the interest nor the capacity to truly hear you. And in that discovery, you reclaim hours, days, years of your life previously spent in fruitless justification. But deeper than time saved is dignity reclaimed. Every unnecessary explanation is a small surrender of self-respect. It says, "My choice is not enough on its own. It needs your validation to be legitimate." It says, "I doubt myself, and I need you to resolve that doubt for me." It says, "I am willing to defend my sovereignty to those who have no rightful claim to judge it." And each of these messages, sent repeatedly throughout a life, creates a person who feels perpetually on trial, perpetually insufficient, perpetually seeking acquittal from judges who were never qualified to condemn. The Stoics practiced a different approach. When criticized, they examined the criticism for truth, extracted any wisdom it contained, and discarded the rest without explanation or defense. When misunderstood, they continued their path without detour, knowing that time would reveal truth more effectively than any argument. When judged by others, they remembered that they answered only to their own reason and the universal nature that governed all things. This was not coldness, it was clarity. Not indifference, it was discernment about where to invest their finite energy and concern. Epictetus, who had experienced the ultimate powerlessness of slavery, taught his students that true freedom begins when you stop seeking it in external circumstances and start cultivating it internally. He would ask them, "Who can take your freedom if it resides in your will alone? Who can force you to betray yourself if you choose not to? Who can make you beg if you have already decided you need nothing they can give?" These questions were not rhetorical. They were invitations to psychological revolution. The revolution begins when you realize that most of what you chase, explain, and beg for is not actually necessary for your well-being. It is merely habitual, conditioned, programmed into you by a culture that profits from your insecurity. You were taught to chase success as defined by others. You learned to explain yourself to avoid rejection. You developed the habit of begging for scraps of validation from people who are themselves starving for the same. But none of this is inevitable. All of it can be unlearned. Consider what happens when you refuse to chase. At first, there is discomfort. The person or opportunity you would normally pursue seems to slip away. Your conditioned mind screams that you must act, must reach out, must make it happen. But if you can sit with that discomfort, something extraordinary occurs. You discover whether what you wanted actually wanted you. You learn which opportunities were real and which were mirages created by your pursuit. You find out who values you enough to take a single step in your direction. And here is the deeper magic. When you stop chasing, you become worth chasing. Not through manipulation or game playing, but through the simple mathematics of human psychology. Scarcity creates value. Self-possession generates respect. The person who does not need you becomes infinitely more interesting than the person who cannot live without you. This is not a strategy. It is a truth about human nature that the Stoics observed and that modern psychology has confirmed. We are drawn to what withdraws from us and bored by what pursues us. The same principle applies to explanation. When you stop justifying every choice, people stop questioning them. When you carry yourself with the quiet certainty of someone who has already settled the matter internally, external objections lose their power. Your refusal to defend yourself paradoxically becomes your strongest defense. Not because you are stubborn or closed-minded, but because you have done the internal work that makes external validation unnecessary. You have asked yourself the hard questions. You have examined your choices against your values. You have reached a conclusion. And that conclusion does not require a committee to make it legitimate. The hardest part of this path is not the external consequences, it is the internal discomfort. We have been conditioned since childhood to seek approval, to explain ourselves when questioned, to pursue what we want with visible effort. These patterns run deep, woven into our nervous system through thousands of repetitions. To act against them feels dangerous, feels wrong, feels like we are violating some fundamental social contract. And in a sense, we are. We are choosing to live by a different set of rules, older and truer than the modern economy of desperation. There will be people who are disturbed by your refusal to chase them. They have grown accustomed to your pursuit, have built their sense of value on your need for them. When you withdraw that need, they experience it as rejection, as judgment, as abandonment. They may escalate, may test you, may try to provoke the old patterns of pursuit and explanation. And you will feel the pull to respond, to reassure, to return to the familiar dance. This is the moment where most people fail, where the discomfort of change drives them back into comfortable slavery. But if you can hold steady, if you can maintain your center while the storm rages, something shifts. The people who truly value you adapt to your new way of being. The people who only valued your desperation reveal themselves and drift away. And you discover that you have not lost anything real. You have only stopped wasting energy on illusions. The relationships that survive your transformation become stronger, built on genuine respect rather than your willingness to demean yourself. The relationships that end were already dead, kept artificially alive by your desperate resuscitation efforts. Seneca spent years in political life, navigating the treacherous waters of Roman power, where a wrong word could mean death. He learned that explanation to those determined to misunderstand you is worse than useless. It provides ammunition for your enemies and reveals your weak points. He learned that chasing favor from the powerful makes you a slave regardless of your formal status. He learned that the only true safety lies in needing so little that loss cannot destroy you. These were not abstract philosophical musings. They were survival strategies born from watching good people destroyed by their own desperation. In one of his letters, Seneca writes about a man who had lost everything, wealth, status, reputation, yet remained unbroken because he had never tied his peace to external circumstances. While others pitied him, he pitied them, seeing clearly that they remained slaves to the very things he had been freed from. This reversal of perspective is the heart of Stoic power. The world sees loss where the Stoic sees liberation. The world sees diminishment where the Stoic sees clarity. The world sees someone who has nothing left to lose where the Stoic sees someone who can no longer be threatened. This is the freedom that waits on the other side of chasing, explaining, and begging. It is not the freedom to have whatever you want. It is something far more valuable. It is the freedom from needing whatever you want. It is the liberation that comes from being so complete in yourself that loss of external things causes inconvenience but not devastation. It is the power of someone who cannot be controlled through deprivation because they have already learned to need nothing the world can take away. But we must be careful here. This philosophy is not an excuse for cold indifference or emotional isolation. The Stoics were not advocating for a life without love, without connection, without caring about others. Marcus Aurelius loved his family deeply. Seneca treasured his friendships. Epictetus taught with profound compassion. What they rejected was not love, it was desperate attachment. Not connection, but neediness. Not caring, but being controlled by that care. There is a vast difference between loving someone and needing them to complete you. Between caring about an outcome and being destroyed if that outcome does not materialize. Between wanting the best for others and requiring their approval to feel whole. The Stoic learns to hold everything lightly, to care deeply while remaining unbroken by a loss, to love fully while maintaining sovereignty, to engage completely while knowing that detachment is always possible if circumstances demand it. This balanced engagement with life requires constant practice. It is not a destination you reach but a discipline you maintain. Each day presents opportunities to chase or to stand still, to explain or to remain silent, to beg or to walk away, and each choice either strengthens your sovereignty or erodes it. There is no neutral ground. You are either training yourself in power or training yourself in powerlessness. You are either building the muscle of self-possession or atrophying into dependency. The practice begins with awareness. Notice when you feel the urge to chase. What are you actually seeking? Is it the person or opportunity itself, or is it validation, relief from anxiety, proof that you are valuable? Notice when you start explaining yourself. Are you genuinely helping someone understand, or are you seeking permission to be who you already are? Notice when you begin to beg. What do you believe will happen if you do not receive what you are asking for? Is that belief true, or is it a story your fear is telling you? This questioning is not meant to paralyze you but to clarify your motivation. Sometimes pursuit is appropriate, when it comes from abundance rather than scarcity, from genuine interest rather than desperate need. Sometimes explanation serves a purpose, when the listener is truly open and the explanation genuinely helps. Sometimes asking for what you need is necessary, when you can ask from a place of self-respect rather than self-abandonment. The Stoic learns to discern the difference, to act from strength rather than weakness, from choice rather than compulsion. Here is a practical test the Stoics might use. Before you chase, explain, or beg, ask yourself, could I walk away from this entirely and remain whole? If the answer is no, if your peace depends on a particular outcome, you are acting from a place of weakness. Not moral weakness, but psychological weakness, a fragility that gives external circumstances power over your internal state. And that weakness will be sensed and exploited, not necessarily through malice, but through the natural dynamics of human interaction. But if you can honestly say yes, I could walk away from this and remain whole, then you are free to engage from a position of strength. Your pursuit becomes an offer, not a plea. Your explanation becomes a gift of clarity, not a defense. Your request becomes a preference, not a demand. And the entire energy shifts. People feel the difference between interacting with someone who needs them and someone who chooses them. The former creates obligation and resentment. The latter creates respect and genuine connection. Marcus Aurelius faced this test daily. As emperor, he had the power to command almost anything, yet he constantly reminded himself that he could not control the most important things: the character of others, the passage of time, the final outcomes of his efforts. He could have spent his reign chasing the approval of the Senate, explaining his decisions to critics, begging his subordinates to execute his vision with excellence. Instead, he focused on what he could control: his own reasoning, his own choices, his own response to whatever happened. And paradoxically, this refusal to chase, explain, or beg made him one of the most effective and respected rulers in Roman history. The lesson translates directly to our lives. The less you need from any particular person, the more freely you can relate to them. The less you require validation from any particular outcome, the more effectively you can pursue it. The less you depend on external circumstances for your peace, the more peaceful you become regardless of circumstances. This is not a trick or a technique. It is a fundamental rewiring of how you relate to the world. That rewiring creates what we might call dangerous presence. Not dangerous in the sense of threatening or aggressive, but dangerous in the sense of unpredictable to those who rely on manipulation and control. When you cannot be moved by flattery, you are dangerous to those who use charm to exploit. When you cannot be controlled by the threat of rejection, you are dangerous to those who wield approval as a weapon. When you do not need what others have to offer, you are dangerous to those whose power depends on creating need. This is why the Stoic path is not popular. It threatens the entire economy of manipulation that modern culture runs on. Advertising needs you to feel incomplete. Social media needs you to chase validation. Toxic relationships need you to beg for scraps of affection. Exploitative employers need you to fear loss of your position. And when you step outside these dynamics through the practice of not chasing, not explaining, not begging, you become illegible to systems designed to control you through manufactured need. You also become magnetic in ways that are difficult to explain. There is something deeply attractive about a person who is complete in themselves, who does not need your approval to feel whole, who can walk away from anything that violates their dignity. This is not the shallow attraction of games and manipulation. It is the deep respect one sovereign being naturally feels for another. It is the recognition that you are in the presence of someone who has done the work, who has faced themselves, who has chosen freedom over comfort. But maintaining this way of being requires vigilance. The world will constantly tempt you back into chasing, explaining, begging. Someone will trigger your old patterns. An opportunity will seem too important to risk losing through non-pursuit. A misunderstanding will feel too costly to leave unexplained, and you will have to choose, again and again, between the temporary relief of falling back into old patterns and the lasting sovereignty of holding your ground. The Stoics would tell you to expect this. They would remind you that every external pressure is an opportunity to practice your philosophy, to strengthen your commitment to living from your center rather than from the shifting opinions of others. They would encourage you to see these moments not as failures but as training, the gymnasium where your sovereignty is forged through resistance. And they would remind you of a profound truth. Your life is finite, your energy limited, your time irreplaceable. Every moment spent chasing someone who is walking away is a moment stolen from your own path. Every hour exhausted in explanation to those who will never understand is an hour lost to meaningful work. Every ounce of dignity traded for approval is gone forever. The question is not whether you can afford to stop chasing, explaining, and begging. The question is whether you can afford to continue. Consider what you would do with the energy currently spent in these fruitless pursuits. What would you create if you stopped explaining yourself and started expressing yourself? Where would you go if you stopped chasing validation and started following curiosity? Who would you become if you stopped begging for respect and started commanding it through quiet self-possession? The life waiting on the other side of this transformation is not perfect, but it is yours, fully, completely, sovereignly yours. The Stoic law of power is simple in theory but demanding in practice. Never chase what runs from you. Never explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. Never beg for what should be freely given. Live this law, and you will lose some things. Some people will leave. Some opportunities will pass. Some doors will close. But what you gain is infinitely more valuable. You gain yourself. You reclaim the sovereignty that was always yours but that you traded away for temporary comfort and false security. This is not the end of relationships or ambition. It is the beginning of relating and pursuing from wholeness rather than from lack. When you engage with the world from a place of completeness, everything changes. Your work improves because you are creating for the sake of creation, not for validation. Your relationships deepen because you offer presence rather than need. Your decisions clarify because you are choosing what serves your highest purpose rather than what soothes your immediate anxiety. The ancient Stoics knew that the greatest battles are fought internally, in the silent moments when you choose dignity over desperation, when you opt for sovereignty over security, when you decide that being whole alone is better than being broken in company. They knew that every small act of self-respect compounds over time, building a foundation of power that external circumstances cannot shake. They knew that the person who needs nothing is the freest person alive, not because they have everything, but because they have learned to be complete regardless of what they have. As we close, remember this: you were not born to beg, to chase, to explain yourself into exhaustion. You were born sovereign, complete, whole. Somewhere along the way, you learned to doubt that completeness, to seek outside yourself what could only be found within. But that learning can be unlearned. Those patterns can be broken. That sovereignty can be reclaimed. It begins now, with a single choice: to stand still when everything in you wants to chase, to remain silent when everything in you wants to explain, to walk away when everything in you wants to beg. If this truth resonates with you, if you are ready to reclaim your power and live as the Stoics lived, from an unshakable center that nothing external can disturb, subscribe to this channel and continue this journey with us. The path is not easy, but it is the only path to true freedom. The world will rage, relationships will shift, circumstances will change. But you, trained, disciplined, sovereign, will remain. Calm, clear, untouchable. Not because nothing can reach you, but because nothing can move you from the ground you have chosen to stand on. This is the Stoic law of power. This is your birthright. This is the life waiting for you on the other side of chasing, explaining, and begging. The only question is, are you ready to claim it?